While the world is busy fighting the Corona war, China is waging another war in the South China Sea. In this video, we will understand the issue through a series of questions. What is going on? What is South China Sea and why is it important? How do countries demarcate their maritime borders? What is the conflict all about? Why is China building artificial islands and what is CABBAGE strategy? Why is China making the moves now? What does it mean for India? What is India's interest in the region? What has been India's stand so far? And finally, should India intervene? Namaste, I am Abhinav from UPSC for everyone. Let's get started. So, what is happening? The Chinese administration has established 2 new administrative districts in the South China Sea. These are called Shisha and Nansha. But why the controversy? Because these are the Chinese names for the disputed Spratly and Paracel Islands in the South China Sea. 5 countries besides China stake claims on them. China has also renamed 25 islands and reefs and 55 undersea entities, all in the disputed South China Sea. In March, China launched 2 new research stations on the Chinese-built artificial islands at Fury Cross Reef and Subi Reef. In April, a Chinese Coast Guard ship rammed and sank a Vietnamese fishing boat in Paracel Island group, and recently a Chinese survey vessel illegally entered Malaysian waters. Even Japan has reported Chinese intrusions near the Senkaku Islands in the East China Sea, a disputed territory between Japan and China. What is South China Sea and why is it important? It's an extremely important body of water. The sea is incredibly rich in natural resources with estimated 11 billion barrels of oil, 190 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, and 10% of the world's fisheries, and most importantly, around 1/3 of global shipping trade worth about $5 trillion annually flows through this sea to the booming population centers and economic markets of Southeast Asia, covering a population of about 2.2 billion people. This semi-enclosed sea is an arm of the Western Pacific Ocean around Southeast Asia. The South China Sea is the shortest way to get to the Indian Ocean from the Pacific Ocean, and it connects East Asia with India, Western Asia, Europe, and Africa, making it very important strategically. Being one of the most important areas in the world, it is subjected to several overlapping territorial disputes involving China, Vietnam, the Philippines, Taiwan, Malaysia, and Brunei. The main problem in the region is about demarcation of the maritime borders. How do countries demarcate their maritime borders? They do so on the basis of a 1982 convention called the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. UNCLOS is the only international convention which stipulates a framework for state jurisdiction in maritime spaces. It provides a different legal status to different maritime zones. This law divides marine areas into 6 zones, namely internal waters, territorial sea, contiguous zone, exclusive economic zone, continental shelf, and the high seas. So how does the UNCLOS work? It first establishes a baseline, which is a low water line along the coast running throughout the shore, as officially recognized by a coastal state. The baseline is the reference for all demarcations. All the waters behind the baseline are known as internal waters. Each coastal state has full sovereignty over these waters. Examples of internal waters include bays, ports, inlets, rivers, and even lakes that are connected to the sea. The foreign vessels of any type do not have the right of innocent passage through the internal waters. The innocent passage refers to the passing through the waters which are not prejudicial to peace and security. However, the nation states have the right to suspend the same. Then comes the territorial sea, which is 12 nautical miles seaward from the baseline. The coastal states have sovereignty and jurisdiction over the territorial sea. These rights extend not only on the surface but also on the seabed, subsoil, and even the airspace. Innocent passage is allowed for foreign vessels. Next is contiguous zone, which extends seaward up to 12 nautical miles from the territorial sea or 24 nautical miles from the baseline. In this region, the coastal state has the right to both prevent and punish infringement of its fiscal, immigration, sanitary, and custom laws. Unlike the territorial sea, the contiguous zone only gives jurisdiction to a state on the ocean surface and floor. It does not provide air and space rights. Foreign ships have the right to innocent passage. Then comes the exclusive economic zone that extends seaward up to 200 nautical miles from the baseline. Within its exclusive economic zone, a coastal state has sovereign rights for the purpose of exploring, exploiting, conserving, and managing natural resources, whether living or non-living, of the seabed and subsoil. They also have sovereign rights to carry out activities like production of energy from the water, currents, and the winds. The exclusive economic zone only allows for resource rights. It does not give a coastal state the right to prohibit or limit freedom of navigation or overflight, subject to very limited exceptions. Next is the continental shelf, which lies between 200 nautical mile and 350 nautical mile marked from the baseline. In this zone, any resources attached to the ocean bed belong to the territorial state. Resources not attached to the seabed and continental shelf come under international waters. And at last comes the high seas. These are the ocean surface and the water columns beyond the exclusive economic zone. They are considered as the common heritage of all mankind and are beyond any national jurisdiction. States can conduct any activities in these areas as long as they are for peaceful purposes such as transit, marine science, and undersea exploration, etc. What is the conflict all about? The conflict is over a group of islands that do not look much but are at the center of a simmering dispute about who owns them. In all, 6 countries have overlapping claims on islands in the South China Sea, and there is one common player, China, which has been jostling with its neighbors over maritime borders for over a century. The other countries involved are Taiwan, Malaysia, Brunei, Philippines, and Vietnam. Following World War II, Japan, who dominated the entire region, lost all control over its surrounding seas. China took the moment to claim the South China Sea by drawing this inaccurate line on the map which encompasses almost 90% of the South China Sea. It became known as the 9-dash line. China claims that it has a historical claim over the South China Sea, tracing back to almost 2000 years in its civilization. The 9-dash line was first inscribed on a Chinese map in 1947. Initially, it was a U-shaped line made up of 11 dashes on a map, covering most of the area. But 2 dashes were removed in the early 1950s to bypass the Gulf of Tonkin as a gesture to communist comrades in North Vietnam. The remaining 9-dash line stretches hundreds of kilometers south and east of its southerly Hainan Island, covering almost 90% of the South China Sea. When the UN established the 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone in 1982, China stuck to its own line, refusing to clarify its boundaries and ignoring claims by other countries. In 2016, an international tribunal at The Hague dismissed the 9-dash line as legally baseless, a ruling that China ignored. The main contention is over 2 island archipelagos, Spratly and Paracel, and nearby geographical features like coral reefs, cays, etc. These Spratly Islands are barely inhabited clusters of islands currently claimed by China, Malaysia, Philippines, Taiwan, and Vietnam. Since 1968, these nations have been engaged in varying kinds of military occupations of the islands and the surrounding waters. These islands are both geographically and symbolically at the heart of the South China Sea. Because if any country can claim the Spratly Islands, it can extend its exclusive economic zone to include the exclusive rights to the surrounding territory. Also, there is a good possibility that these islands may have large reserves of untapped natural resources. Why build artificial islands, and what is the CABBAGE strategy? It is extremely hard to legitimately claim uninhabited blocks of sand. A few countries have built small buildings and ports on the claimed islands and even stuck a few people there. But China believes that all the Spratly Islands belong to them, which is why they are building artificial islands in the region. Installing military bases on these artificial islands took the conflict to a whole new level. China is building these islands in order to expand its control over the surrounding waters, using a strategy that they have been using called the CABBAGE strategy. They surround a contested island with as many ships as possible. Like wrapping leaves around a cabbage, the Chinese seal off the access to any disputed island using a series of fishing boats, sailing boats, survey ships, and naval destroyers to cut off the island's access to food and supplies. By building artificial islands, China is essentially setting up naval bases. The more naval bases they have, the more ships they can support, and the more territory they can slowly take control of. The Chinese are continuously using the CABBAGE strategy, taking over contested territory but in small steps, avoiding the possibility of igniting a bigger conflict. Since 2015, China has threatened to declare an air identification zone over the South China Sea, declaring that all aircraft that fly through it would need Chinese permission. Publicly, China claims that its intentions are not militaristic, but its actions say otherwise, and it's heightening tensions in the region. But for now, the disputes remain only in the legal and diplomatic realms that only occasionally break into minor clashes. Why is China making moves now? What China is doing is nothing new, but the COVID-19 pandemic provides a good distraction. China is practicing what one might call the coronavirus diplomacy, sending defective masks and personal protection equipment across the world. But at the same time, it's also continuing to make territorial claims in the South China Sea. With the global focus on the Wuhan virus, China believes that its actions would largely go unchallenged. Regional observers are troubled by Beijing's attempts to take advantage of the fluid geopolitical situation following COVID-19, with many Southeast Asia leaders sick or in self-imposed quarantine and Washington distracted by the pandemic at home. Chinese militias have upped the tempo of operations in critical regional hotspots. What does it mean for India? Three aspects of the drama unfolding in the South China Sea are relevant for India. First, Chinese militia operations have focused on the region's western end close to the Indian Ocean region, targeting countries that India has a close political and military relationship with. China's naval and militia operations have harassed Vietnamese and Indonesian law enforcement agencies, which frequently cooperate with the Indian Navy and Coast Guard in regional security initiatives. Second, the developments in the South China Sea coincide with the rise in Chinese activity in the Eastern Indian Ocean, particularly Chinese research and survey vessel presence. China has been making inroads in the Eastern Indian Ocean region through the development of the strategic Kyaukphyu deep seaport in Myanmar, giving it direct access to the Bay of Bengal. In September last year, an Indian warship expelled the Xi'an-1, a Chinese research vessel found intruding into the exclusive economic zone off the coast of India's Andaman and Nicobar Islands. At a time when there's talk of a China-backed plan to construct a canal across the Thai Isthmus and a secret agreement for a Chinese naval base on the Cambodian coast, a spurt in Chinese presence in the Eastern Indian Ocean has triggered disquiet in New Delhi. To add to India's discomfort, China's mining operations in the southern Indian Ocean have expanded considerably, as also the presence of Chinese fishing boats in areas close to India's territorial waters. The third factor for India to consider has been the growing instances of Chinese intelligence ship sightings in the Indian Ocean region. Chinese Dongdiao class intelligence gathering ships now operate in the waters of Eastern Indian Ocean, keeping an eye on the Indian naval movements. One such Chinese spy ship was spotted close to the eastern sea border near the Andaman and Nicobar Islands late last year, causing some disquiet in India's security establishment. What are India's interests in the region? Securing the trade transit route, which passes through the South China Sea, is vital to India's growing trade, energy, and security interests. The importance of forward maritime presence and naval partnership is seen critical to deter India's adversaries in the region. India is wary of growing China's assertiveness in the Indian Ocean region. Any military conflict in South China Sea will have ramifications on the Indian Ocean region as well. It may hamper regional security situation, and in such case, India's relationship with Southeast Asian countries may get disrupted. So South China Sea is very important to India from strategic point of view. 55% of India's trade passes through the Strait of Malacca, which opens into the South China Sea. If China controls this region, it will upset the global trade practices and countries like India will directly get affected. Any belligerent action by China can hamper India's foreign trade passing through that region. Therefore, India has a stake in ensuring freedom of navigation in the region. India also has ongoing hydrocarbon exploration projects in the region with Vietnam, which have been resisted regularly by China. If China is successful in controlling the sea lanes, India would lose international trade route or pay extra to China to keep it restored. India does not want this to happen, and thus it is compelled to get involved in South China Sea dispute to safeguard its economic interests. What is India's stand so far? India is not a direct party in the South China Sea dispute, and in best of its interest, it may like to have an amicable relationship with both China as well as the other nations. As of now, India's official position is that South China Sea dispute should not be internationalized and all the parties concerned should resolve it bilaterally. India firmly believes in the principles of freedom of navigations and operations and open sea lines of communications and resolving disputes within the framework of international law. However, its economic, maritime and strategic interest demands maintaining freedom of passage for maritime trade through the South China Seas. So, should India get involved? Even though India is not a party to the South China Sea dispute, it has all the reasons to maintain peace in its backyard. There is a compelling case for India to get involved in the South China Sea dispute, primarily for three reasons. First, to maintain maritime security. China's overgrowing ambitions has chilling effect on India's security architecture, and New Delhi would like to counter China by getting involved in South China Sea dispute. There is global maritime security interest involved in the region, and many nations want India to balance the assertive and rising China and like it to get involved in the dispute to maintain peace and security in the region. Secondly, to develop close ties with ASEAN countries to fulfill its Act East policy. India's Act East policy necessitates economic and defense ties with Southeast Asian countries, and many of them want India to play a major role in resolving the South China Sea dispute. It appears India is more willing to listen to its ASEAN friends by seeing its growing involvement in the dispute. And last, to counter China in the Indian Ocean region. India, having a voice in the major regional security issues, confers its prestige that commensurate with its regional power status. This has necessitated India to get involved in shaping the security architecture of the Indo-Pacific region. In such context, India, along with the US and other powers, is gearing to play a major role as security provider in the region. India's South China Sea policy is a test case of offensive defense foreign policy pursued by New Delhi. It is used for deterring China to maintain its hands-off policy towards India. As such, this policy serves such limited reasons to maintain an even relationship with China. Finally, India, as a neutral observer, can assert its weight on the region in partnership with several other nations to resolve the South China Sea dispute. Thank you for watching our video. Please hit the subscribe button if you liked our video. We are open to your suggestions. You can provide the same in the comment section. Stay happy, stay safe, and have a great day.